بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue and inshallah complete our study of Islamic Plan for Life tonight. So we are in Unit 7 and we have two discussions left. One is about religious culture and national culture, and the other is about religious identity. Sometimes for us as Muslims, and sometimes for outsiders, it may be very difficult to distinguish what is Islamic and what is practiced by Muslims, and done by Muslims, for example. Maybe it's not as such Islamic in the sense that it is inspired by the Quran or Sunnah, it is rooted, but it's something that Muslims do. And sometimes what Muslims do may be inspired by Islam. Sometimes what Muslims do may be compatible with Islam, and sometimes might be in conflict with Islam. So there are three scenarios. If it is inspired by Islam, means that they have learned it from Islam and it is filled with Islamic ethos and values. If it is compatible with Islam, means it's something neutral but doesn't conflict with Islamic principles. And if it is in conflict, then it means that maybe some Muslims do, but they are not aware or they don't bother about checking that whatever they do is compatible with Islam. In the course of history, in all nations, you see that sometimes gradually some practices become established. Some ideas become established. And after some time, people inherit these ideas and these practices and these customs without necessarily knowing where this come from, when did it start. And sometimes those who are more contemplative, they find it odd, and some people may even think that they should stop this. They try to reform their culture and their society. So in this discussion, we want to see how can we identify whether something is Islamic or it's just what some Muslim communities or nations or people do. First of all, we should know that when Islam began, it inherited a situation, because Islam didn't start in vacuum. So Islam came and emerged in a society which already had a culture. And that culture was mixed with some teachings of the prophets, like Prophet Ibrahim, ala nabiyyina wa alayhi salam. And Mecca was a very important place, even before Ibrahim, but at least from the time of Ibrahim and Ismail, when it was restored, and people used to go there for pilgrimage. So there were things that remained from teachings of the prophets, including, or more particularly, Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Ismail. But also many superstitious ideas also were there. Many superstitious practices were there. In the same way that from pure Tawheed that Prophet Ibrahim called for, they ended with worshipping idols, and they had idols, equal to the number of the days in the year. So they had, more than 300 idols. So from pure Tawheed shifted to worshipping idols. And Kaaba was a place that they used to store some of their idols. So when you see this contrast, then you can imagine what can have happened to other things. For example, if the prophets called for justice and fairness, then you shouldn't be surprised that in the time of Jahiliyyah, there was no such a thing as fairness and justice. One of the things that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was a young person, had committed to was a special treaty called Hilful Fudul. Hilf means like treaty. Fudul means people who have fadl, who have favor. These were some young people of Mecca that saw that a stranger who had gone to Mecca was mistreated by some locals. So these young people said, let us promise each other that as long as we can, we support these strangers that are not able to receive their rights. And Rasulullah, even after Islam, said, if I am still called for that treaty, I am going to go and support. So there were exceptions. There were noble people, but the general culture was the culture of materialism, looting, attacking, robbing, etc. So the ideas of Tawheed and worshipping Allah and practices like prayer and Hajj changed, and many other morals changed. So Islam had to bring reform. Islam had to call for revival of pure Abrahamic tradition, plus Islam had to build a culture, because by the passage of time you need to be always updated. So you cannot just say, okay, we go back to the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Especially when Islam was spreading and going to other nations. So Islam had to reform the origins, had to restore Tawheed, had to restore human virtues, but at the same time encourage Muslims to use their talents, their creativity, arts, and architecture, all kinds of technology in order to build a new culture, a new civilization. And you see that how much Islam has influenced humanity in general. But because there is no kind of a strict structure or a kind of a strict hierarchy that says, okay, you Muslims have to do this. If you embrace Islam in Iran or in Pakistan or India or Indonesia or in North Africa, etc., you have to do this, you have to do this. No. People are left free. People are naturally and out of love do these things. There is no strict instruction and rigid, hierarchy that they have to answer. So this is very good, but also the consequence is that then some people may go a little bit wrong, some people may go too much wrong, or over time things that started to be good may change. So we have to accept also that this has happened. We cannot say everything is what Islam wanted. So we have now a very diverse, a very colorful range of practices, arts, customs, habits, traditions. Most of them are compatible with Islam. But there can be also exceptions, and this is the role of Muslim scholars, Muslim activists, educators, to always check everything against pure Islam, original Islam, and see where we can be better, where we need to stop, where we need to change and take another direction. So we have to always be polishing and refining ourselves so that we can get closer to the original and pure Islam of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes Islam took very strong positions against some things when they were very wrong. For example, when it comes to worshipping idols, Islam was very clear from the beginning. But for example, when it comes to drinking khamr or wine, Islam didn't from the first day oppose this. And the legislation of banning this was introduced much later. And this is because these things are not at the same level. Establishing Tawheed, stopping idol worshipping is not the same as stopping drinking wine. Not that this is not important, but that is fundamentally important. Tawheed, as we have said many times, is so fundamental. It is principle of principles. It's not just one of the 5 principles. Tawheed is principle of principles. Rasulullah used to say, "Qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu." So in 13 years of Mecca, the main focus of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to establish Tawheed, to remind them of human dignity and some basic rules and moral, basic ones, like not to kill, not to commit fornication, not to steal, things like this. Many of the rulings were introduced in Medina. So Islam didn't oppose everything which was wrong at the same time and with the same intensity. Certain things Islam was very strongly against it, like idol worshipping, like killing, like burying their daughters, for example, alive, things like this. Certain things needed education, like stopping slavery. So Islam was very clear from the first day that human beings are equal, but try to regulate, restrict, and then eradicate slavery. Encourage people to treat them very well like members of their family, to free slaves, and said you cannot enslave people. So gradually in the whole Muslim world it has stopped. Some of the things like usury, like drinking wine, these were legislated later that they were prohibited. So Islam had a very clear policy. It was not treating every bad thing with the same level of emphasis. Some of the things were prioritized, some of the things were dealt as an urgent issue, some of them as something important but not urgent. And if there is something which is not in conflict with Islamic major principles, Islam didn't introduce any pattern or model. Said, you can be free. You remember when we talked about clothing, about food, etc., we said in the past, Islam gives us some codes for example, dress. But then you can have your own creativity. You make your own, fashions, etc. Certain things about food, ingredients, and not to be haram, etc. But what type of meals and cuisines you want to make is free. So this allowed Islam to grow, to welcome different nations, give them courage to mix Islamic principles with their own local, national, or maybe sometimes, geographical, identity, but come forward. Of course, if we had true and proper leadership and Islamic governance, things could be much different. This is when we had Umayyads and Abbasids and others. Still, Islam managed to do this. One of the things that also we have here, and we said before also, is that Islam said to Muslims that you should not isolate yourselves. You should not be hesitant in learning from other nations, and also not hesitant to teach other nations. You have to do exchange. So Muslims were encouraged to do exchange, but they were asked not to let anyone to dominate you. لَن يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ سَبِيلًا. So Allah has not given any chance, any right to someone to dominate and damage independence of Muslim Ummah. But exchange, learning, teaching, selling, buying, traveling, welcoming, all are welcomed in Islam. There is a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam here in a box, the box of hadith, and I like you to also know the Arabic text of the hadith, so I searched for it. It is from the book Man La Yahduruhu al-Faqih, volume 1, page 252. When Sheikh Tusi brings hadith about salat, one of the sections is Babu ma yusalla fi, about those things that you can say your prayer in. There is a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam that Allah said to one of the prophets of Bani Israel, tell believers not to put on clothes of my enemies, not to eat the food of my enemies, not to behave like my enemies. Otherwise, they would then become like them. It means that Muslims can learn, can exchange, but they have to be very careful about those cultures and those people that they have taken a stance against God, a stance against faith, and they have tried to make things just worldly and just at a materialistic and kind of animal level. We have to be very careful not to resemble them, not to be influenced by them. Free nations, okay. Friendly nations, okay. But if there are enemies of God, then we have to be very careful. With respect to the exchange and appreciating some elements of local cultures, there is a reference here to the letter of Imam Ali to Malik Ashtar in letter 53 of Nahj al-Balagha. Imam Ali says to Malik Ashtar, when you go to Egypt, Egypt was new to Islam, so they had a very ancient culture. Imam Ali said to Malik Ashtar, if there is a good sunnah, a good tradition that they have learned from their ancestors and has caused cohesion and organization and order in their society, don't break it. So not only he didn't instruct him to change everything, he didn't even keep silent. He emphasized that if they have something from pre-Islam era which is useful, let it remain. You must, Imam said to Malik Ashtar, you must, like just governments before, remember valuable practices and whatever has remained also from the teachings of the Prophet, etc. The next issue is about some heretical practices that can happen. Heresy is not necessarily by doing something very bad or very un-Islamic. Anything which is not from religion, if you introduce it as a religious idea, this is heresy. Ulama say, إدخال ما ليس من الدين في الدين بدعة. Yeah? If something is not from Islam and I say this is from Islam, this is bid'ah. Or some people say إدخال ما لا يعلم أنه من الدين في الدين بدعة. To be more precise, anything that you are not sure it is from Islam. You cannot say maybe it's from Islam, so tell people do it. Anything that you are not sure that it is from Islam and you enter this into Islam, this is bid'ah. So it's not anything new is bid'ah. No, anything that is not Islamic and you introduce it as Islamic. Even salat. For example, if I tell you, every Wednesday, that we come here, there is a practice of 2 rakah salat, for example, in Wednesday night that, you should do. And say, salat, I told them to say salat. Salat is very good. But you cannot, fabricate a 2 rakah salat in the Wednesday night, from yourself and say it is. Or maybe you say, I am not sure, maybe there is a hadith about this. I cannot say definitely there is no hadith about it. No, you must be sure. So sometimes, unfortunately, what we have is that people start things as, their own proposal, their own suggestion, But then little by little, after a few decades, other people think this is part of religion and they become very committed to it. So we have to be very careful about this. One of the tasks of ulama is always to be vocal against heresies. And Hadith says that if heresies appear and someone has knowledge and doesn't, say anything and hide his knowledge about this, then he would be cursed. He would be far from the mercy of Allah. إذا ظهرت البدع, when heresies emerge and someone has knowledge but hides knowledge because he said, no, I don't want to have headache, people then get angry with me. I should not say this is not Islamic. Of course, when we have our maraja, it's better that if scholars have some ideas, to let it to maraja to decide about it and ask maraja for guidance. Not that every sheikh or every scholar say, I am not convinced that this is Islamic, etc. because there are many issues to consider, and our maraja are the best to address these issues. Then there is a discussion here in the book about some of the cultural things that some Muslims may do which are not compatible with Islam. For example, sometimes you travel to some Muslim countries or cities, you see things are not organized, things are very busy and crowded, you don't see any planning, their cities, there's no urban planning, etc. They shouldn't think that this is Islamic. It's quite un-Islamic, because Islam so much emphasizes on order and being organized and being tidy and being clean. So you should not think if you go to a Muslim market, for example, and it's not clean, that it is because of Islam. This can be everywhere in the world. Muslims and non-Muslims are in this regard similar, that sometimes they may do things not because of their religion. Or, for example, in some places, maybe the way they treat women, or, for example, the girls are not Islamic. To deprive girls of education, secular education, religious education, is not Islamic. But maybe in some places, some people do. So those who have proper knowledge of Islam, they can understand what is Islamic, what is not Islamic. But those people who don't know except what they read on newspapers or what they watch on TV, for them it's difficult to understand who is Muslim, who is not Muslim, or who is genuinely Islamic, who is not genuinely Islamic. So we need to educate. Some of the customs that we have in some countries about marriage and how difficult sometimes they make it for the youths to get married, this is not Islamic. And in the early Islam, marriage was not something very difficult. And sometimes in some countries, it's very, very difficult for a young person to get married. The next issue is, and our last issue, is about identity. Today, the issue of identity is very, very important. More than ever in the history, the issue of identity is important, because now people are surrounded and faced with lots of different cultures. And sometimes even the same person belongs to different cultures. For example, imagine you are a migrant and you have come from another country to the UK, for example. So you have lived part of your life in another country. Your parents, ancestors are from that country. There is a whole range of cultural things that you have inherited. Now you are growing up in another country. And you belong to both cultures somehow, but not fully to any of these two cultures. And then you have your own faith, for example. And then you have your own plans for your future that might be different from your parents or your siblings, etc. So sometimes one person is inside feeling somehow torn apart, or doesn't know what to do and how to organize these things. And sometimes they may have identity crisis. So today the issue of identity is very important. Actually, when people have managed to meet their basic needs, such issues like identity and spirituality and meaning of life become more important as soon as you manage to meet your basic needs. Because when you are struggling for survival, for food, these things don't come forward. But when you have some safety and some security and you are somehow well off, then these important issues emerge. So it's very important for us to have some reflections about identity here. Identity is sometimes acquired, or part of identity, you can say, is acquired, and sometimes, or part of it is received, is not acquired by you. It's given to you. You have inherited, you have received. For example, no one can deny that my mother tongue is a very important part of my understanding of myself. Because identity is what you think of yourself, who you are. It's a whole set of ideas, thoughts, experiences, memories, relations, preferences, even your pleasures and pains in the past. They are all part of your identity. So my mother tongue definitely is part of my identity, part of my understanding. Even, sometimes the way you think is influenced by your language, and people in different cultures, when they have different languages, even sometimes the way of thinking is different. I don't know if you have noticed, for example, in Iran, because we have different languages. So sometimes, for example, if we speak with some friends from some parts of Iran, we see that the way of thinking is somehow different. Not always, but in certain issues. So there are certain elements that in some languages are more visible, in some languages are not visible. Some languages are more, catering for emotions. Some languages are more formal and legal and, explicit. So my mother tongue definitely has some impact on my identity. My parents, where I was born and grew up, even where I did my schooling and education, all are important, and many of these things I didn't have any role. I didn't choose where to be born, and which language to speak. But these are not the main factors. The main factors are what you can acquire. And this is why you see people from the same background, some of them manage to be very successful and confident and, honorable. Some people become hopeless or useless even and confused and don't know what to do with the same mother tongue, with the same education, the same background. Because the main thing is those things that you have to decide. And when we have discussion about Islamic understanding of human qualities, they say Islam would not prefer anyone over another because of gender or because of ethnicity or color. It's all Inna akramakum indallah atqakum, based on what you can achieve, what you have role. It's not fair that we say A is better than B because A is born here, B is born somewhere else. We cannot introduce such distinctions to human beings. But we can say A is better than B because A is more kind, more honest, more knowledgeable, more pious, more fair. Because these are things that we can all try to achieve. So there are two elements or two aspects to our identity, those things which we have no say and those things which we can acquire. And although at the beginning religion may not be coming through your choice, because for example you grew up as a child in a Muslim family or Christian family, but later when you become an adult and mature, then the amount of attention you give to your religion and the place that you give to your religion in your life is very important. Two people brought up in the same community, one of them doesn't pay attention to religion, one of them, religion becomes the most important part of his identity or her identity. So, it's up to us to have an active role in defining our identity and saying then what type of ideal identity I want to have. Or just be passive and let others decide for us and be then at the mercy of different factors, what media decides, what majority decides, what governments decide, what celebrities decide. You can leave to them to decide for you who you are. But I don't think any reflective human being would do that to himself or herself. Sometimes I was thinking maybe we can liken identity to like operating system of a computer. So our body is like the hardware of the computer. But computer needs softwares. And among these softwares, then you have your operating system. So for example, it's Windows or it's Apple. This is the main software. And without this, you cannot install any other softwares and you cannot benefit from the hardware. So if someone has very strong body, but doesn't have that clear understanding of identity, is like a very good computer, you have a very good case, but doesn't have operating system. So cannot do anything. Or if there is some virus going there and makes it not able to work. Sometimes ideas are like viruses. Sometimes people with spreading doubts and questioning some of the things make a very successful human being despaired or hopeless or doubt her own aqidah. People have to be very careful. I can give you hope, I can make you hopeless. I can increase your hope in life and I can decrease. Of course, you can defend yourself, but most of the time people are not, taking guards. Someone goes to a lecture, someone goes to a meeting. It's not going with guard. So they are happy to receive things. They are open. And then if someone says something or does something that damages their confidence, their morals, their certainty, then they can suffer. We can have one general identity and we can divide into different elements. For example, some people, they have a special identity as part of their job or as their occupation. For example, if someone loves to be a teacher and for many years has been teaching, to be a teacher is part of now his or her identity. Or someone is a doctor or nurse or I don't know, as a cleric, whatever. Sometimes great part, and for some people majority maybe of the part, their identity is part of because of their occupation. And when they lose that job, they are very much affected. Some people, when they retire, because they love their job and for many years, they have been working seriously, to retire for them is a disaster because part of the identity. Therefore, it is very good if you choose a life that you feel very happy about it, psychologically and spiritually, and you feel it's meaningful because this is going to be part of your identity. It's not just where you get your salary. Your job becomes part of your identity. There is also political identity. Some people, part of their identity is which political party they support or they belong. Sometimes which football team they support, it becomes part of their identity. So there are different elements and compartments in identity, and part of it is religious identity. For some people this is minimal, for some people this is major. So it depends how much they give attention to their faith. Then there is a discussion in the book about some of the major elements of Islamic identity. If we want to go to very, very roots and foundations, we can refer to this ayah, which is part of Ayatul Kursi, Surah Baqarah, verse 256. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع عليم. Here, for us to be strong and stable and hold on to the firmest handhold is introduced as two things. الكفر بالطاغوت والإيمان بالله من يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله. So to be a believer at the very root is a matter of rejecting the vicious power or vicious direction or vicious inclinations and character, and to move towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the absolute truth, absolute beauty, absolute love, absolute light, absolute knowledge. So either we are going towards Allah and distancing ourselves from Taghut, or we are going to be going to the opposite direction. So a Muslim, first of all, should think always that which path I am taking. Islam is a matter of being on a journey. Islam is not static. It's a journey. Islam is not a choice that is completed over a day or over a week. Islam is a choice that requires constant response. Yeah? Like if you want to be alive, you cannot breathe just once. If you want to be alive, you have to breathe all the time. If you want to be a Muslim, you have to always give good response. You cannot, say, okay, I was religious before and I did my Hajj, etc., and now finished. It's dynamic. So Islamic identity is not a label that I can buy and fix. I put on my dress or I put on my even forehead and say, okay, look, I am Muslim. And if someone says, what is the sign of your Islam? So look at the label. It says, I am Muslim. Look at my name. My name is an Islamic name. No. Islam can be seen only in the heart. Therefore, here in the book, there's a discussion that there are two ways to assess Islam of someone. One is social. As a community, we need to know the members of the community. Here, with declaration of Shahadatain, someone becomes Muslim. So we have to consider every person who says Shahadatain as a Muslim unless they do or say something that conflict with this. If they themselves disqualify themselves, that's another. But we cannot question without that. But this is for social recognition. For people thinking I am Muslim. But for myself, I cannot be satisfied with Shahadatain. For myself, I have to be sure that Islam is rooted in my heart and shows itself in my ideas, in my behavior, in my actions. Therefore, part of a Muslim identity is to be a servant. Some ulama, when they end their letters and they want to put their names, they put Al-Abd. Al-Abd means I'm a servant of Allah. If you ask a person who drives, for example, for himself, who are you? He mentions his name. If someone is, working for himself, driving for himself. But if you ask the driver of the king, who are you? He wouldn't mention his name. He would say, I'm driver of the king. Yeah? Because to be driver of the king is more important than his personal name. There are many people who have personal names, but it's only me that I am driving the king. So, when I ask someone, what do you think about yourself? What is your identity? The first thing that should come to his mind or her mind is that I am servant of Allah. Then I am son of my father and mother. Then I am, father of my children, etc. But I am a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think this is a very good definition of abd. Abd is the one whose understanding of himself or herself cannot be complete without belonging to the Lord. So a Muslim considers the whole world as creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and would consider himself or herself accountable before him and finds his relation or her relation with Allah to be the most important relation, believes in the prophets and in particular Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as his final guide for humanity, and the Quran as the book of life, as manual for life, and would not leave dunya for akhirah or akhirah for dunya, would have a balanced attitude towards dunya and akhirah, not equal attention but a balanced attention. Akhirah certainly is more important, but we should have a balanced position. And also, a Muslim observes Allah's boundaries which are fixed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the borders that Allah has introduced to us. Haya and iffah, modesty is very important, akhlaq for Muslim. Practices like salat, like fasting, like hajj, observing tahara and najasa, all these things, feeling responsible towards poor people, these are parts of our identity. And then there is a discussion about some of the things that have a great role in making identity. One is family. Family is a very important factor in forming identity, and what a better environment than family. Our understanding of ourselves as a child and then as an adult later very much is shaped in the family. And this is why it's very important that the parents treat their children with love, with respect, and discipline them, give them adab and manners, with, of course, love and moderation. Another thing is the educational system, schools, I don't know, nursery, Montessori, primary, secondary school, house or university, wherever we go for education or homeschooling, they have a role in shaping our identity, plus communications and in particular media. The books we read, the things that we watch, all are important. So finally, the last conclusion in the box is that the main element of Muslim identity is servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this precedes any acquired or inherited or received elements of identity. This is a matter of iman and certain virtues and righteous deeds. And in the first volume, Islamic Belief System, we try to clarify the part about the beliefs. And the second one, Islamic Plan for Life, we try to talk about virtues and practices that we need to have. So Alhamdulillah, in this way we completed the book Islamic Plan for Life. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity that over several semesters we managed to complete Islamic Belief System and also Islamic Plan for Life in Hujjat Academy. We are grateful to Allah for this gift, and we ask Allah to help us to reflect and absorb and practice what we have learned. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.